I woke up with a tube down my throat and blood pressure alarms screaming above my head. Emergency surgery. An internal hemorrhage caused by a torn uterine artery. The surgeon told me later, very calmly, that if I'd arrived 30 minutes later, I wouldn't have made it. My abdomen felt like it had been split open, because it had been. As the anesthesia faded, the first thing I asked wasn't about pain. It was about my baby. 7 weeks old, still nursing, still waking every 2 hours, and suddenly I couldn't even sit up without help. The nurse asked, "Who's taking the baby tonight?" I called my parents from the ICU. "I almost died," I said. My voice sounded foreign. "I need you to take her, just temporarily, please." There was silence. Then my mother laughed, not kindly. "Your sister never has these emergencies. You're always dramatic." Then she added, casually, "We're in Europe. We're not cutting our trip short." I stared at the IV line in my arm, at the fresh surgical bandage already seeping red. Europe. Luxury hotels, vineyard photos I'd see later. I hung up. From my hospital bed, still monitored, still dizzy, I hired round-the-clock care, signed paperwork with hands that would not shake, arranged night nurses while my newborn cried for me down the hall. And something inside me finally went quiet. For 6 years, I'd been sending them $5,000 every month. That's $360,000. That night, I stopped the payments. Not angrily, precisely. 3 hours later, the door opened. My grandfather stepped into the room, took one look at the chart, the empty chair, the monitors, and said, "So this is what they chose instead of you." And that's when the truth finally stopped being private. Before I go on, pause for a second. If you've ever been sick, scared, or barely holding it together, and the people who were supposed to show up didn't, this story is for you. Tell me where you're listening from, or just drop a heart if you've ever realized help only comes when you stop begging for it. Now let me tell you what those 6 years of emergencies really paid for. For 6 years, I sent the money without missing a month. $5,000 every month. Automatic, quiet, undisputed. My mother said it was for medical bills. My father said it was just temporary. My sister, Lena, never mentioned it at all. She didn't have to. Everyone acted like this arrangement existed in some fragile space where questions would break it, so I didn't ask any. I worked extra hours, took contracts I shouldn't have taken while pregnant, postponed plans, delayed savings, told myself this is what families do when someone is struggling. No one ever said thank you. What I got instead were comments. "You're lucky you can help. Not everyone has the discipline you do. Your sister's life is complicated." Complicated turned out to mean carefree. New clothes, weekend getaways, stories about restaurants I couldn't afford anymore. But whenever I noticed, I corrected myself. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself love doesn't keep receipts. The money left my account the same day every month. I stopped checking the balance afterward because it made my chest tight. I didn't want to know what it cost me. I wanted to believe it mattered. Lying in that hospital bed, stitched together and empty-handed, something finally shifted. They hadn't needed the money. They'd needed my silence. And the moment I stopped paying, the illusion cracked. Not because I made a speech, not because I accused anyone, because the truth has a way of surfacing the second you stop funding the lie. And my grandfather was about to see it for himself. My grandfather didn't sit down right away. He stood by the window, hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the parking lot like he was lining something up in his head. He'd always been like that, quiet first, then precise. "How long," he asked, still facing the glass, "have you been sending them money?" I told him. 6 years, $5,000 a month, no gaps. He turned slowly. His face didn't change much, but his eyes did, sharpened, focused. "Did they tell you why they couldn't come?" he asked. I repeated my mother's words exactly. I didn't soften them. I didn't add commentary. I let them stand the way they'd been delivered to me. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked tired, not sad, disappointed in a way that felt heavier. "Have you ever seen the bills?" he asked. I shook my head. "They said it would stress me out." That's when he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "They's been telling me you never help," he said quietly, "that you're unreliable, selfish." The words didn't sting the way they should have. They explained too much. "I think it's time," he continued, already tapping the screen, "we stop guessing." He stood up, leaned down, and kissed my forehead. "You rest," he said. "I'll handle the conversations you shouldn't have to." As he walked out, I realized something unsettling. For the first time since I'd gone under the knife, I felt safe. And somewhere far from the ICU, a story that had survived on silence was about to collapse under questions. I didn't hear what my grandfather said to them. I didn't need to. I knew him well enough to imagine it. Calm voice, no accusations, just questions that didn't allow room to dodge. He never raised his voice. He let facts do the work. 2 days later, he came back. This time, he brought a folder. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, screenshots my mother had never expected anyone else to see. 6 years of deposits, my name, every month, like a signature I hadn't realized I'd been signing. "They told your aunt and cousins you never helped," he said, "that you were always too busy, too self-involved." I stared at the ceiling. It felt easier than reacting. "They also told me," he added, "that your sister's lifestyle came from bonuses, smart investing." He flipped a page. Casino withdrawals, luxury hotel charges, spas, boutiques, flights. None of it medical, none of it urgent. All of it paid for with money I sent because I thought someone needed it more than I did. "They didn't think I'd check," he said quietly. "They counted on you staying quiet." I swallowed. My incision burned when I shifted. "And when you stopped the payments," he continued, "they panicked." I finally looked at him. What did they say? He met my eyes. "That you abandoned them." I laughed then, a short, broken sound that surprised us both. Because lying there, stitched, bruised, barely upright, I was the only one who hadn't walked away. And for the first time, someone else could see it too. My phone rang that night. Not my parents, my sister. Her voice came fast, breathless, already defensive. "Why did you tell Grandpa anything?" she demanded. "You always do this. You make things look worse than they are." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny cracks. "I didn't tell him," he asked. Silence, then a scoff. "So what? Now he's mad? You're really going to blow this up while you're in the hospital?" Blow this up. I thought about the incision across my abdomen, the machine still tracking my heart rate, the baby asleep 2 floors down, cared for by strangers I'd hired because my own family wouldn't come. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I stopped sending money." Her voice dropped. "You can't just do that." "I did." She started talking faster, excuses tumbling over each other. Bills, stress, how our parents were counting on me, how Grandpa didn't understand modern problems. I waited for something else to appear in her words. Concern, guilt, even curiosity about whether I was okay. None came. Finally, she asked, "What happens now?" I closed my eyes. "Now I recover." "That's it?" she snapped. "Yes, that's all I have energy for." She hung up on me. I didn't feel shaken. I felt done. Because emergencies have a way of clarifying priorities. and anyone who treats your survival like an inconvenience has already answered every question you were afraid to ask.
My grandfather didn't tell me what he was planning. He just showed up again the following afternoon, pulled a chair close, and asked how the pain was. We talked about the baby, about how strange it feels to survive something you didn't see coming. Then he said, almost casually, "I updated my estate documents this morning." I turned my head slowly. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, gently, not defensive, certain, "because now I know who's been carrying the weight." He explained it simply. No percentages at first, no lectures, just intent. Anything meant for my parents would go through transparency now. Anything meant for my sister would be conditional, and the largest share, the part meant to protect, not reward, would be placed in a trust for my daughter. For her, he said, tapping the side of the bed, so she never grows up thinking love has to be earned. My throat tightened. I hadn't cried since the surgery. I did then. "They tried to convince me you were selfish," he continued, "that you'd abandoned them." I shook my head. "I was trying to keep them afloat." He nodded. "That's the difference." Later, when he stood to leave, he paused. "They'll be upset," he said. "They'll say you turned me against them." "I didn't," I replied. He smiled faintly. "No, you just stopped hiding the truth." After he left, I stared at the wall for a long time, not because I felt saved, but because for the first time in years, someone had stepped in front of me instead of standing behind what I gave. I gave them one chance. Not because they deserved it, because I needed to know for myself whether anything real was left. My grandfather suggested a small gathering when the baby turned 1 month. Nothing formal, just a room, a cake, and the chance for people to show up without being asked to perform. My parents came late. My sister came smiling, already talking. No apology, no hesitation. Like the surgery, the money, the silence, none of it had happened. We were 10 minutes in when my grandfather stood to make a toast. That's when my mother leaned forward, thinking the microphone wasn't live. "You really can't move things around? At least for Lena. It wouldn't hurt to balance it." The room went still. My sister froze mid-sip. My father stared at the floor. Someone coughed. My grandfather didn't respond right away. He waited, let the moment exist. Then he looked at me. I didn't feel embarrassed or angry or exposed. I felt finished. "That answers it," he said, calmly, stepping away from the mic. My mother's smile collapsed when she realized what had just happened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I stood, picked up my baby, and walked out. No confrontation, no speech. Some people think closure comes from saying everything. Sometimes it comes from hearing exactly what you needed to hear once and never going back. Before the last part, let me say this. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while being told you're too much, stay here. Subscribe for stories about boundaries, self-worth, and the quiet kind of strength that doesn't need permission. And if this reminded you of someone who's still giving too much, share it with them. Now let me tell you what happened after I stopped trying to be understood. After that night, everything went quiet. Not the tense kind, the honest kind. My parents didn't call to explain. My sister didn't text to defend herself. There were no long messages about misunderstanding or love or family being complicated. They knew. We all did. The moment had passed and nothing could be walked back. My recovery was slow. Healing always is when it's layered. Body first, then everything underneath it. I learned how to sit without wincing, how to carry my baby again, how to sleep without flinching at every phone vibration. The money stayed where it belonged. For the first time in years, my account didn't drain on the same predictable day. I watched the balance stabilize, then grow. Not dramatically, just enough to breathe. My grandfather became part of my daily life in a way he never had before. He showed up without asking for anything, held the baby while I showered, listened without correcting. That was new. My father eventually sent one message. I should have said something sooner. I read it once. I didn't reply. Not because I was punishing him, because acknowledgement after damage doesn't undo it.
What surprised me most wasn't how much lighter my life felt without them. It was how normal it felt. Like this was how things were always supposed to be. A life where love didn't come with invoices, where emergencies were taken seriously, and where my child would never learn that care had to be bought. I stopped being an ATM, and in doing that, I finally started living. I don't tell this story often, not because it hurts too much, but because it doesn't anymore. Life settled into something steady. My body healed, my daughter grew stronger. Nights became quieter, not because there was less to worry about, but because I stopped carrying what was never mine. My parents stayed distant. My sister moved on quickly, in the way people do when accountability gets uncomfortable. I didn't chase explanations. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't need them. My grandfather kept his word, not loudly, not performatively. He protected what mattered and stepped back when it was done. That, I learned, is what real support looks like. One night, rocking my daughter to sleep, I caught my reflection in the dark window. Scar still there, tired eyes, but something else too. Peace. I whispered a promise to her, one I never heard growing up. You will never have to earn love. Not with money, not with silence, not by saving people who won't show up for you. Family isn't who drains you dry and calls it loyalty. Love isn't guilt dressed up as obligation, and survival is not selfish. If you're listening to this and you're still giving everything to people who minimize your pain, pause. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to heal. You're allowed to choose a life where care goes both ways. I did. And that choice didn't make me cold. It finally made me free. I didn't walk away with revenge. I didn't walk away richer in the way people imagine when they hear stories like this. There was no dramatic collapse, no public shame campaign, no moment where everyone suddenly admitted they were wrong. I walked away with something quieter. Clarity. I learned that sacrifice without respect isn't love, it's extraction. That guilt can sound a lot like responsibility if you've been trained early enough, and that people who benefit from your silence will always ask you to stay quiet a little longer. Stopping the money didn't make me cruel. Stopping contact didn't make me heartless. Stopping explanations didn't make me wrong. It made me honest. My life now is smaller in some ways. Fewer calls, fewer expectations, fewer people who feel entitled to my energy. And in that smaller space, everything that matters finally fits. My daughter laughs easily, sleeps peacefully. She doesn't know anything about 6 years of quiet payments or one night in an ICU where her mother was dismissed as dramatic. She never will. That's the point. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. You don't owe endless access to people who disappear when you're bleeding. You don't owe proof of pain to justify boundaries, and you don't owe your life to anyone just because they call it family. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop paying the price and walk toward a life that doesn't demand your collapse to stay standing. That's what I did, and I would do it again, every single time.